Your teenager locks themselves in their room. They avoid eye contact. They respond with single words. 3 years ago, they came to you with everything. Now, you're lucky to get a genuine hello. And the scariest part? Something shifted in their self-confidence. And you didn't even notice when it happened. Here's what research from Stanford University reveals. Adolescents who experience chronic criticism from parents show a 73% higher rate of anxiety disorders. But here's the shocking part. Most parents creating this damage think they're being helpful. In this comprehensive guide, I'll walk you through 7 specific behaviors that quietly erode your teenager's self-esteem. Behaviors that most loving parents practice daily without realizing the psychological impact. More importantly, I'll show you exactly how to transform each pattern starting today. The hidden psychology of parental influence. Before we dive into specific behaviors, you need to understand something crucial about teenage brain development. Dr. Lawrence Steinberg's research at Temple University shows that adolescent self-concept is 85% more malleable than adult self-concept. This means your daily interactions literally shape your teenager's internal voice for decades. The adolescent brain is rebuilding itself. Neural pathways for self-worth are forming based on their primary relationships. When parents unknowingly damage these forming pathways, teenagers develop what psychologists call conditional self-worth. They learn to value themselves only when meeting external expectations. This creates 2 devastating outcomes. Either they become chronic people pleasers who sacrifice their authentic selves for approval, or they rebel completely, deciding that since they can never be good enough, why try at all? The encouraging news? Because their brains are so adaptable, positive changes in your behavior create rapid improvements in their self-esteem. Small shifts in your approach can literally rewire their self-concept within weeks. Behavior 1. The comparison trap. Why can't you be more like your sister? Your cousin just got accepted to Harvard. When I was your age, I never acted like this. Sound familiar? You think you're motivating them. You're actually destroying their sense of individual worth. Dr. Leon Festinger's social comparison theory explains exactly why this damages self-esteem. When parents constantly compare their teenager to others, the adolescent brain learns to measure worth through relative performance rather than intrinsic value. This creates a psychological pattern called competitive self-worth. Here's what happens in your teenager's developing mind. They stop asking, "Am I growing?" Instead, they ask, "Am I better than others?" This shift from internal to external validation becomes a lifelong struggle with inadequacy. Research from the University of Rochester tracked 1,200 teenagers for 5 years. Those who experienced regular parental comparisons showed 67% higher rates of depression and 54% lower academic motivation by age 18. They also demonstrated significantly more difficulty forming healthy relationships in early adulthood. But here's the fascinating neuroscience behind this. When teenagers hear comparisons, their amygdala activates the same stress response as physical danger. Their developing prefrontal cortex interprets parental comparisons as rejection signals. Over time, this creates chronic stress responses that interfere with learning, emotional regulation, and identity formation. The transformation approach requires 3 specific shifts. First, celebrate their unique qualities daily. Instead of, "Why aren't you more organized like Jake?" Try, "I love how creative your approach to projects is." Second, focus on their personal growth trajectory. "You're handling stress so much better than last month," replaces comparisons to others. Third, acknowledge their individual challenges. Every teenager faces different obstacles based on personality, learning style, and life circumstances. Implementation strategy for this week. Catch yourself before making comparisons. When the urge arises, pause and find something unique about your teenager to acknowledge instead. Notice how their body language and energy change when you focus on their individual strengths, rather than their performance relative to others. Behavior 2. The perfectionism prison you. Set impossibly high standards, thinking you're preparing them for success. Instead, you're creating a psychological prison where anything less than perfect feels like failure. This is what Dr. Brené Brown calls perfectionism armor. The belief that if they do everything perfectly, they can avoid pain, blame, and judgment. Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck's groundbreaking research on mindset reveals something counterintuitive about perfectionist parenting. Children of perfectionist parents actually achieve less academic success long term than children whose parents focus on effort and growth. The reason? Perfectionist expectations create what psychologists call performance anxiety paralysis. When teenagers believe they must be perfect to earn love and approval, their brains develop hyperactive stress responses to any potential failure. Dr. Martin Seligman's research at the University of Pennsylvania shows that perfectionist teenagers have 3 times higher rates of eating disorders, self-harm behaviors, and suicide ideation. Here's what's happening neurologically. Perfectionist pressure activates the brain's threat detection system constantly. The teenagers developing neural networks associate mistakes with danger. Over time, this creates chronic anxiety that interferes with learning, creativity, and risk-taking necessary for healthy development. Consider Sarah, whose parents expected straight A's and perfect behavior. By age 16, she was having panic attacks before every test. She stopped trying new activities because the risk of not excelling immediately felt unbearable. She developed elaborate strategies to hide any struggles from her parents, creating chronic stress and isolation. The transformation approach focuses on effort over outcome. Instead of, I'm disappointed in this B grade, or try, I can see how much effort you put into this project. Replace, you should have practiced more, with, what did you learn from this experience? This shift teaches teenagers that their worth isn't tied to perfect performance. Neuroscientist Dr. Andrew Huberman explains that when we praise effort rather than results, we activate the brain's learning networks. This creates what researchers call growth mindset, neural pathways, brain patterns that see challenges as opportunities rather than threats. Practical implementation this week. When your teenager makes mistakes, resist the urge to point out what they should have done differently. Instead, ask them what they learned. When they succeed, acknowledge their hard work and persistence rather than just the outcome. Watch how this simple shift reduces their anxiety around performance and increases their willingness to try new things. Behavior 3. The emotional invalidation pattern. Your teenager says, "My friends are ignoring me and I feel terrible." Your response? Don't worry about it. High school drama doesn't matter. You'll be fine. You think you're helping them gain perspective. You're actually teaching them that their emotions don't matter. Dr. Marsha Linen's research on emotional validation shows that invalidating responses from parents create what psychologists call emotional dysregulation patterns. When teenagers consistently hear that their feelings are wrong, dramatic, or unimportant, they stop developing healthy emotional processing skills. Here's the neurological impact. Emotional validation activates the brain's prefrontal cortex, helping teenagers develop emotional regulation skills. Invalidation activates stress responses and shuts down the learning centers of the brain. Over time, invalidated teenagers either become emotionally explosive or completely shut down emotionally. University of Washington studies followed teenagers for 10 years. Those who experienced chronic emotional invalidation from parents showed 78% higher rates of anxiety disorders and 65% more difficulty in romantic relationships as adults. They also demonstrated significantly lower emotional intelligence scores and struggled with decision-making throughout their 20s. Consider the difference between these responses. Invalidating, you're being dramatic. This isn't a big deal. Validating, that sounds really painful. It makes sense that you'd feel hurt when friends ignore you. The second response doesn't agree with their perspective necessarily, but it acknowledges their emotional experience as real and understandable. Dr. Dan Siegel's research on adolescent brain development shows that validation literally helps build neural pathways for emotional regulation. When parents validate emotions before offering perspective, teenagers develop stronger capacity for managing difficult feelings independently. The transformation approach involves 3 steps. First, reflect what you hear. It sounds like you're feeling left out, and that's really hard. Second, validate the emotion. Anyone would feel hurt in that situation. Third, offer perspective only after validation. What do you think might help you feel better about this? This week's implementation strategy. Before offering solutions or perspective, practice reflecting and validating your teenager's emotions. Notice how their body language changes when they feel heard versus when they feel dismissed. Pay attention to how validation actually makes them more open to your guidance rather than less. Behavior. 4. The conditional presence problem. You're physically present, but emotionally absent. During dinner, you're thinking about work. When they're talking, you're planning tomorrow's schedule. When crisis hits, suddenly you're available. But during calm moments, you're essentially checked out. Dr. John Bowlby's attachment research reveals that children develop their sense of worth based on their primary caregiver's consistent emotional availability. When parents are only present during crises, teenagers learn that they only matter when something is wrong. This creates what psychologists call crisis-seeking behavior. Some teenagers start creating problems just to get parental attention. Others hide problems completely, believing they only burden their parents when they're struggling. Both patterns damage self-esteem by teaching teenagers that their baseline existence isn't valuable enough to warrant attention. Harvard researcher Dr. Reed Larson studied family interaction patterns across 500 families. He found that teenagers whose parents were consistently emotionally present during routine interactions showed 89% higher self-esteem, scores, and 76% better academic performance than teenagers whose parents were only available during crises. Here's what consistent emotional presence looks like neurologically. When parents give focused attention during mundane moments, they activate the teenager's mirror neuron systems. These neurons help adolescents develop self-awareness and emotional regulation. Inconsistent attention disrupts these crucial developmental processes. Consider 2 scenarios. Crisis-only presence. Parent scrolls phone during car ride, but becomes intensely focused when teenager mentions failing a test. Consistent presence. Parent puts away phone during car rides and engages in casual conversation regularly, making crisis conversations feel natural rather than unusual. The transformation approach involves what Dr. Siegel calls presence practice. This means deliberately creating small moments of focused attention throughout regular days. 5 minutes of undivided attention during routine activities has more impact on self-esteem than hours of crisis management. Practical implementation this week. Choose one routine activity where you'll be completely present with your teenager. Car rides, meal prep, or bedtime conversations work well. Put away devices and focus entirely on them for these specific moments. Notice how these small investments in attention change the overall quality of your relationship. Behavior 5. The achievement obsession trap. Every conversation becomes a performance review. How are your grades? Did you study enough? Have you thought about college applications? You track their academic performance like a stock portfolio, but forget to ask how they're actually feeling about their life. Dr. Tim Kasser's research at Knox College reveals that teenagers whose parents focus primarily on achievement develop what psychologists call contingent self-worth. Their sense of value becomes dependent on external accomplishments rather than intrinsic qualities. This creates a devastating psychological pattern. Achievement-obsessed teenagers either burn out from chronic pressure or give up entirely when they can't meet impossibly high standards. Both outcomes damage long-term success and mental health. University of Rochester studies tracked 2,000 students from high school through college graduation. Students whose parents emphasized achievement over well-being showed 45% higher anxiety rates, 38% more depression symptoms, and ironically, 23% lower actual academic achievement by college graduation. Here's the neuroscience behind this paradox. When teenagers feel valued only for achievements, their brains develop chronic stress responses around performance. This stress actually interferes with learning, memory consolidation, and creative problem solving. The pressure meant to improve performance actually undermines it. Consider Jake, whose parents asked about grades daily, but rarely asked about his interests, friendships, or emotional well-being. By junior year, Jake was experiencing panic attacks before tests and had lost interest in activities he once enjoyed. He began lying about homework to avoid disappointing. Conversations with his parents. The transformation approach involves what researchers call whole-person parenting. This means showing equal interest in your teenager's thoughts, feelings, friendships, and personal growth as you do in their achievements. Instead of, "How was school?" try, "What was interesting about your day?" Instead of, "Did you study enough?" ask, "How are you feeling about the upcoming test?" Instead of focusing only on grades, notice effort, improvement, curiosity, and character development. Dr. Angela Duckworth's research on grit shows that teenagers who feel valued as complete individuals actually develop stronger persistence and resilience around challenges. They're more likely to view setbacks as learning opportunities rather than personal failures. This week's implementation. For every achievement-focused question you ask, balance it with 2 questions about their inner world. Ask about their opinions, feelings, friendships, or interests. Notice how this shift changes the quality of your conversations and their willingness to share with you. Behavior. 6. The criticism disguised as help pattern. I'm just trying to help you improve. I only point out mistakes because I care. Constructive criticism is how people get better. Sound familiar? You believe you're helping them grow. They hear constant messages that they're not good enough as they are. Dr. John Gottman's research on relationships shows that negative interactions must be balanced with positive ones at a 5-to-1 ratio for relationships to thrive. Most parents unknowingly maintain a 1-to-1 ratio or worse, focusing more on what needs fixing than what's working well. This creates what psychologists call deficit-focused self-concept. Teenagers internalize a voice that constantly scans for problems, mistakes, and areas needing improvement. They lose the ability to appreciate their strengths and positive qualities. Stanford research on adolescent development shows that teenagers who receive predominantly corrective feedback develop 67% lower self-confidence and 54% higher perfectionist anxiety than teenagers who receive balanced feedback emphasizing both strengths and growth areas. Here's what constant criticism does to the developing brain. Negative feedback activates the brain's threat detection system, flooding the teenager with stress hormones that interfere with learning and emotional regulation. Over time, this creates neural pathways that automatically scan for problems and inadequacies. Consider the difference between these approaches. Criticism heavy. You forgot to clean your room again. You never follow through on responsibilities. How do you expect to succeed in college if you can't handle basic tasks? Balanced approach. I noticed you've been really focused on your art project this week. I love seeing your creativity. Let's figure out a room cleaning system that works with your schedule. The transformation approach involves what positive psychology researchers call strengths-based parenting. This means noticing and acknowledging positive qualities, efforts, and improvements at least 5 times more often than pointing out problems. Dr. Martin Seligman's research shows that when teenagers hear regular acknowledgement of their positive qualities, they develop stronger resilience, higher motivation, and better emotional regulation. They also become more receptive to guidance about areas needing improvement. Practical implementation this week. Keep a mental count of positive versus corrective comments you make to your teenager. Aim for 5 positive observations for every corrective comment. Notice how this shift changes their responsiveness to your guidance and their overall mood around you. Behavior. 7. The control obsession. You try to manage everything. Their friendships, study habits, phone usage, clothing choices, even their facial expressions. You think you're guiding them toward success. They feel like they're serving a life sentence for the crime of being a teenager. Dr. Edward Dece's research on autonomy shows that teenagers who experience chronic control from parents develop what psychologists call learned helplessness and rebellion cycles. They either become completely dependent on external direction or rebel against all guidance, including beneficial advice. This creates long-term problems with decision-making, self-confidence, and personal responsibility. Overly controlled teenagers either can't make decisions without permission or reject all input from authority figures. Neither outcome prepares them for successful adulthood. University of Rochester followed 600 teenagers for 15 years. Those who experienced high parental control showed 56% lower leadership skills, 43% more anxiety in decision-making situations, and 38% more difficulty in romantic relationships as adults. Here's the neurological impact of control obsession. When teenagers can't make age-appropriate choices, their brains don't develop crucial decision-making neural pathways. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for judgment and planning, requires practice to develop properly. Over-control prevents this essential practice. Consider Maria, whose parents chose her classes, monitored her friendships, and decided her daily schedule. At 19, she couldn't choose a college major without calling home 3 times a day. She had developed almost no confidence in her own judgment because she'd never been allowed to practice making decisions and learning from consequences. The transformation approach involves what researchers call scaffolded autonomy. This means gradually increasing decision-making opportunities while maintaining appropriate safety boundaries. Start with low-stakes choices and gradually increase responsibility as they demonstrate good judgment. Instead of controlling every decision, focus on teaching decision-making skills and allowing natural consequences to provide feedback.